school's in, and the teacher's got a saxophone.
Leeds at it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of loud.
That's okay.
Yeah, but anyway,
I was gonna actually sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," but I'll
But we have so many questions to ask you, and again, it is an honor to have you on.
Okay. First of all, how much money do I win if I answer the questions correctly?
Well, I don't know, Jeff. What was the going rate right now?
I thought we were paying in Hennessy.
Oh, we're paying in Hennessy. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, what you were drinking?
That ain't gonna work. But okay. If will something come down if there's a secret word? Now I'm really
It's
gonna rain on you.
Pee Wee Herman will drop down.
Okay.
Right.
I was just wondering because if anybody listening understands the reference I just made, then good for you. Because that one goes back.
It's got to be hanging and it's got to be like falling. It's got to be like falling side to side, and the secret.
It was like, say the secret word. Say the secret word, and the duck comes down. You win $100. That was from Groucho Marx back in 1950, somewhere around there. All right. So now now you know where I live.
Yeah, that was
Still.
before your time, though. So close. I get it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the show was in syndication for 50 years after that. So
Right. I was so excited because when I was a kid, I was born in '68. When I was a kid, I used to break my neck getting off the bus in order to get home in time to see the Monkees, and I was just like, I'm gonna miss it. I had no idea at the time that show was way syndicated at that point.
Oh yeah, because I think that show lasted 2 seasons maybe. I think
every single show was amazing to me as a kid. I don't know why. It was very inappropriate for a kid to watch, but I loved it.
All
anyway.
right. Well,
still watched it. We all did.
Yes.
I did.
So anyway, let's talk about Eric. That's why he's here, right? Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You moved to Pittsburgh.
Actually moved to Richmond, Virginia first.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. It then eventually ended up in Atlanta around 1982, even though you don't have any love for the Braves, which is fine. It's perfectly okay. Did you?
I used to go see them a lot. Excuse me. I used to enjoy going to see them. But by then, got to tell you, by 83, 84, the team wasn't too good.
Yeah, it wasn't until the early 90s that I actually figured out how to pull something out. But then
and they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
96.
And then that was it.
Yep.
They're still a good team, just not World Series.
Yeah. So you were in Atlanta in 1982. That was around the same time that I moved here to Atlanta, and I'm still here. You were obviously in your 20s then, but I was around 14. But we have a very eclectic music scene here in Atlanta, as you know. And as a musician, what was the primary thing that you noticed about the music scene as compared to up north in Virginia and Pittsburgh? I mean, to be absolutely honest with you, I moved to Atlanta coincidentally. I actually moved there in 83. One of my closest friends who ended up playing trumpet with me with Prince, Matt Bliston, who's known to the Prince fans as Atlanta Bliss. He was from Pittsburgh. We went to school together, and we played in bands off and on for over 10 years before we ever got involved with Prince. He had moved to Atlanta. He was interested. We were both kind of burnt out on the bar band scene, because that's what basically we were bar band musicians, playing from 250 to 275 gigs a year, just night after night after night. And in those days, you might bring home $150, $200 for playing night after night. Matt moved to Atlanta in order to try to see if he could get involved in commercial music, making jingles and things like that. But at the time, Atlanta was becoming a big media center, CNN and all the things like that. And he wanted to get out of Pittsburgh. So he went down to Atlanta. A few months later, I went down to visit him and just decided to say, to hell with it. I'm done with Pittsburgh. I'm out of there. I think I'll come down here. that was pretty much my plan. So I was there just kind of bumming around and not really doing much. A year later, I was starting to work with Prince. I was still living in Atlanta for a couple more years while the first few years I was working with Prince and really commuting. So by then, I wasn't really spending that much time in Atlanta. I don't really recall that there was that much of a scene bar band wise. There were a couple of good clubs. There was Moon Shadows in Virginia Highlands, which was
is still there, by the way.
Is that still okay?
Still there.
I used to go to some clubs and listen to bands in Buckhead and places like that. I did a handful of just club gigs, lounge gigs. Couldn't even tell you. I little memory of what they were even about. So really, it was a point in time where I was kind of wondering what was next for me as a musician, and I was coming to a determination that I didn't know that music was something I was really going to be able to continue in a way that was going to be meaningful for me. When you're in your 20s and you're bumming around and playing with good bands, I played with some absolute fabulous bands, but when you're just making a couple $100 a week, that's okay when you're in your 20s. But by the time you're in your early 30s and you're still living hand to mouth playing gigs like that, you say, okay, is this all I'm going to do with my life? And jazz was always the primary, aspiration musically for me. But at that point, I didn't really think that I possessed what was necessary as just a straight up jazz player. For example, just say, go to New York and just jump into the pit there and see if I could sink or swim. That wasn't something that that at the time I think that I would have been successful doing. So, like I say, I really didn't have much of a plan. I was just kind of living hand to mouth, and then all of a sudden, my brother called. My brother Alan, who was Prince's office manager and road manager at the time, he calls and says Prince is putting this band called The Family, and he's interested in having a saxophone in it. Apparently, Alan played him some recordings that I had done, and Prince was fortunately enthused enough to say, "Tell your brother, arrange for your brother to come up here and let's do some recording sessions, see what happens." So, my involvement with Prince was real simple. I needed a gig, and it was, that was it.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. But I do want to take a little step back. Like, tell me what type of music that you and Matt Bliston, aka Atlanta Bliss, played together. You guys had a hard funk jazz. Rob had kind of filled me on some history of this, pre-Prince.
The first band that we played together was in I think 1975. It was a lounge band, like a real Holiday Inn kind of lounge band, with a singer piano player. His name was Alki Stereopoulos, of all, and wonderful singer, wonderful musician. We had a good little band, and we played. This is 1975. We were playing still a lot of standards from the Tin Pan Alley, Great American Songbook. But we were also playing some contemporary standards. In 1975, you were in a lounge band. You were playing songs from Jesus Christ Superstar and stuff like that. But it was a quintet, and we played hotel lounges and restaurants and dining rooms. But you're playing 4, 5, sometimes 6 sets a night, 6 nights a week after week after week. And it was good music, and it was an important gig for both me and Matt, because we got a lot of shit together on that gig, because the nature of the music gave us enough time to stretch out. And like I say, playing old Cole Porter songs, Jerome Kern, that's the shit that I enjoyed, grew up listening to by jazz cats. Right. So that was an important year for, I think, for both of us. After that, in the next several years, we went just hardcore into R&B and funk, because that's where we could make a living around the Pittsburgh scene. So we eventually had a band called Taking Names, and it was basically a band put together by me and a drummer. His name was H.B. Bennett, who was my closest, dearest friend, who tragically passed away several years ago. But we had put this band together. Matt played with us in this band. He was kind of like it was an 8-piece band that didn't make it easy playing bar bands with an 8-piece band. So wasn't a whole lot of money, but
No.
this was 1977, 78. It was a tremendous time to be an R&B funk oriented cover band. Because like you say, you had Stevie Wonder at his best, you had Earth, Wind, and Fire at their best, you had George Clinton and Bootsy at their best, you had Isley Brothers at their best, AWB, Kool and the Gang. So, I mean, it was a field day for, what we could do. I used to like to take the songs and try to make arrangements out of them that could maybe, be a little bit different. Sometimes it was a matter of taking like an Earth, Wind, and Fire song that might have like, 40 musicians on it and trying to break it down to something that would work with a band with like one singer and 2 horn players. We did write our own material. The pop-oriented stuff that we wrote really wasn't very good because that's not really, as writers, where my heart was or where Matt Blissman's heart was. We wrote a lot of instrumental music. And fortunately, in those days, we would... The gigs would start about 10:30 at night, 10:30 until 2. That was the bar band hours in Pittsburgh. The first sets, we could normally get away with playing instrumental stuff. And some of us were, a lot of the stuff we played was more in the character of like Weather Report, because those were our heroes. I mean, that was my biggest hero in musicians and bands at that time. So we were writing and playing music like that. And we could get away with it on the first set because the dancers wouldn't come to the club until about 11:30. So by the time they come, when we were doing the second set, now it's okay. Now we just got to keep them dancing. But back in those days, as long as we could keep them on the dance floor, we could take the music and the songs anywhere we wanted. So we might take a song like Kool and the Gang's like Open Sesame or something like that. And we play that sucker for 15 minutes, because we do the song and then we go off into vamps and grooves and everyone would solo. As long as the dancers were out there, everything was fine. So, then after that band broke up from 1979 to 82. I was with an absolute tremendous band led by a singer named Billy Price. Billy Price is a blues and R&B singer, was based in Pittsburgh. He spends his time now between Pittsburgh and Baltimore. He's very, very well known in the hardcore blues R&B community. I mean, he's a regular performer at many of the blues festivals. He's even been an artist in residence. And he had a band for many years called the Keystone Rhythm Band. And I was a member of that band for 4 years. The band predated me by about a year and a half. After I left the band, that band was together for, I think another 5, 6, 7 years after I left the band. In the 4 years that I was in the band, and this is no bullshit. This is because I have all of my journals and all of the itineraries to prove it. I played 981 gigs with that one band in 4 years. Now that's, now, and that was typical. I mean, that was to be a bar band musician back then.
Yeah.
That's what you did. And we spent about, I'd say about 2 weeks of every month playing in the bars around Pittsburgh. The rest of the time we would be on the road playing a circuit of clubs anywhere from Boston down to Atlanta. We played a lot around DC and Baltimore, Philadelphia, and we were doing double bills. I mean, there were some absolutely fabulous bands. Duke Robillard, his band. Bob Margolin was a tremendous guitar player, but was guitar player for Muddy Waters. Fabulous Thunderbirds, Roomful of Blues, the Nighthawks. But we used to do double bills with Albert Collins quite often, and with Stevie Ray Vaughan, because this was when Stevie Ray was still playing clubs. He hadn't blown up into being a superstar yet. So, people ask me about what it was like to play with Prince and say, well, is he the greatest guitar you were ever on stage with? And I would say, well, maybe he was one of them. But Stevie Ray Vaughan would always sit in with us when we would do these double bills. Wow. And I got to tell you, Stevie Ray Vaughan was one of those cats that come up, just plug his guitar into an amp, hit one note, and the stage would levitate. I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan was absolutely just one of the most incredible guitar players you could ever imagine, And I was really happy for him and not surprised a couple of years later when all of a sudden he broke out and became a superstar. I said, oh yeah. If anyone on that circuit was going to do that. But anyway, this band with Billy Price was a tremendous band. In fact, I want to give a shout out. Might be listening. There's a tenor saxophone player by the name of Jim Eminger. We called him the Iceman, and he still lives in Pittsburgh. And he was my section mate in that band. And I probably played, like I said, I played 981 gigs standing next to that cat, you know. And
that's
I got to tell you, there's a lot about the saxophone that I didn't know before I met him, and that I know now. You know, he's a tremendous jazz and R&B and blues player, and it was a treat to be able to be in a band with somebody of that caliber. And we're still tight now. He's a bit now. Jeff, he is an Atlanta Braves fanatic. So if he's watching now, he's got one eye on this and the other guy on the game going on right now.
That's right.
But anyway, he you know, still one of my dearest friends, and one of the wonderful things about playing that band was being able to play in the section with him. So that was basically it. After that, I was burned out on bar bands, and I said I never want to see the inside of a nightclub again. So
well, I was lucky enough to actually see Stevie Ray Vaughan one time, and it was by accident because I was actually there to see Huey Lewis and the News on their sports tour.
Okay.
And I didn't know who was opening up, and happened to be sitting there. I got there early, well, Rob will tell you, I always get to concerts really early, and we'll sit there and just stare for an hour. And then finally the opening band came out, and I didn't know who it was. They left all the lights on. This was at the Omni in downtown Atlanta, and this guy in this hat walks out, and he goes, "My name's Stevie Ray Vaughan, and we're Double Trouble." And they broke into it. I was like, "Never heard of you." But by the time they got done playing, I was like, "Huey, who am I here to see? I forgot who I was here to see."
No, I know. Because everyone used to talk in those days about his brother Jimmy, who was, you know, the guitar player with Thunderbirds. And Jimmy's fabulous. I mean, Jimmy's is absolutely great. But his little brother came up, and oh wow. Yeah.
And speaking of brothers, I mean, you briefly touched on the fact that your older brother, Alan Leeds, had really gotten a name for himself, obviously. For those of you just joining us on audio, we are joined by the legendary saxophonist Eric Leeds in the house. It's an honor to have you here. But again, your older brother, Alan Leeds, had gotten a name for himself at this point for having been the road manager for James Brown and then Prince. Mm-hmm. You know, the question I had was really kind of, and then you mentioned that he gave you a call saying that Prince was putting together the family and wanted a saxophone, and that's how you got in. So I kind of have a little bit of a two-part question. But first off, what was it like watching him succeed so well in an industry that you were really heavily involved in? And were you jealous or envious at all, or did you kind of, you know, separate yourself from that emotion, or what was it like watching your brother succeed so well?
Well, Alan was in the business end, you know, and so it was a whole different aspiration. I was thrilled. I mean, it was my big brother, you know, and I mean, I have to really be honest, is that I don't know if I would be a musician if it wasn't for him, because it was Alan that introduced me to every aspect of the music that I loved. Now, maybe I would have found it otherwise. I don't know. But you know, Alan, we had an uncle, Mel Leeds, who was the station manager of WINS radio in New York in the 50s, who was really one of the creators of the whole top 40 radio format. My uncle Mel was who brought Alan Freed from Cleveland to New York, who was the first, you know, Cousin Brucey, Murray the K. All of these guys got their start, you know, their big start on radio because of my uncle. So my uncle used to send to us, so my brother basically, you know, the DJ copies of all the hit records. Every week we'd get a box of 45s. So Alan was already into the music. I don't know why my brother gravitated to the music when he was like 5, 6 years old, but by the time Alan was 9 or 10 years old, he wasn't like subscribing to Weekly Reader or Hunters or, you know, or Popular Mechanic. He was subscribing to Billboard, Cashbox, and Record World, all of the trade journals. So he had already decided that somehow, some way, you know, the music industry, radio, whatever, and he first was a radio disc jockey in Richmond, Virginia, where we lived. And that's where he then became a show promoter and everything. And that's where he met James Brown and everybody else in R&B then. So it was Alan that basically introduced me to this record, all this music. So I'm 5 years younger than Alan. So part of it is like, okay, that's my big brother. I want to be cool like my big brother. So I'm going to be into what he's into.
Right.
But it did resonate with me beyond that, beyond just, trying to be into what my brother is. And I did start to, even at a relatively young age, discern certain things, preferences of mine versus preferences of his or whatever. But for, probably the first music that really, meant something to me when I was 6 or 7 years old was Little Richard, Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, those guys. But then Alan brought home What I Say by Ray Charles.
Oof.
And it was all over.
I bet.
Yeah, it was all over. I am a musician primarily because of the music of Ray Charles. I'm a saxophone player primarily because of the guy who was his Maceo Parker. I mean, if you want to talk about back in those days, David Fathead Newman, who was just absolutely, to me, just still one of the greatest. I mean, he passed away years ago, but he was my first hero as a saxophone player. And to this day, there are a few sounds in music that are more beautiful or as beautiful to me as the sound that this cat David Newman put through his horn. And that was what captured my imagination. So by the time I'm 9 or 10 years old, and said, wow, maybe I'd like to see if I could do that. Now, I didn't really consider pursuing music as a career until many, many years later. But, I had to do something.
Was there a specific piece of advice that Alan gave you from a music perspective? I mean, from a music business perspective, that he passed on to you that you were just like, man, that piece of advice saved my ass.
No, the problem is that the advice that he passed on to me, I never listened to, because the biggest piece was like, take the gig. The hell with whether you like the music or not. Take the gig. And the only time I ever did that was when I met Prince.
Well, there you go.
Because I had no interest in Prince. I knew very little about his music. There was some music of his I liked, but there was nothing about it that suggested to me that there was anything about him that I would have any particular interest in wanting to be involved in. And Alan's calling me for 2 weeks, and I'm sitting in Atlanta doing next to nothing. And Alan's calling me, there's a gig up here. Will you get on a plane and come up here? And finally I did. So.
Yeah, and did he ever call you from the road and share any kind of crazy stories that, from the road from James Brown's?
Well, I was around James Brown a lot. I mean, I knew James Brown and since I was 14 years old. So Alan didn't have, I mean, yeah, there were always crazy stories, but I was privy to be, to witness the crazy stories.
What was the first crazy thing that you saw James Brown do or saw backstage? You were like, holy shit, this is for me.
This is one of my favorite moments of growing up and understanding what the whole thing was about. This was 1966. We're living in Richmond, Virginia. I'm in 8th grade. So I'm 14 years old. Alan is 19 years old. Alan was already an on-air disc jockey at the local R&B radio station in Richmond. It was WANT. He had also known James Brown already for a couple of years, because back in those days, he had to understand that the business model for the musicians and the artists, pop artists, was very simple. The artists had relationships with the DJs because the DJs played their records. Right, and it was real simple. They play my record, I get paid, I can come into town and sell tickets. And it was a cash and carry business. I mean, it was very simple. So Alan, there was one of the program directors at this radio station who was kind of a legend in Richmond. His name was Tom Mitchell. And he was the promoter on many of the shows that would come through. So Alan learned a lot from him. So Alan just kind of, said, okay, this is how I want to get into this. So he would make it a point to get backstage at all the shows with a big reel-to-reel tape recorder and go to the artist and say, my name's Alan Leeds. I'm from the radio station. We're playing your records. Can you, I got a Saturday morning radio show. Can you do me an air check? Can you do me a spot? So Alan would have Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. And they say, yeah, we'll do anything, because that's what they would do for the DJs. This was the legal way of doing payola. I mean, really, right. It was the legal way of doing it. So Alan would, so that's how he met James Brown. James took a liking to Alan. And anyway, so now it's 1966. Alan had already known James Brown for about a year. I had met James once, really briefly, for about 2 minutes, but this is the first time. Anyway, we're at the theater where they were playing, the Mosque Auditorium. It's still the venue in Richmond. It's now called the Altria Theater, and it's still a venue that a lot of musicians play. Anyway, we're backstage. This is 1966. James Brown, it was about maybe 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening. Back in those days, he didn't really do sound checks because the PA systems on gigs back then was 2 microphones. There was a microphone for the lead singer and maybe a microphone for the horn soloist. That was it. So there was no sound to check. There were no mixers. There were no mics on the drums, no mics on the horns, no mics on anything.
I didn't even realize that there's only 2 back in those days. There was only 2 mics on the stage.
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, what we think of as sound systems didn't even start to really, exist until a couple years after that, late 60s, early 70s. But by then, that's why he used to have 3 drummers. 3 kits and 3 drummers, and those cats would play so freaking hard.
Yeah.
And the guitar players and bass player would just turn their amps up to 10. Yeah. If you're British and playing with Spinal Tap, you turn it up to 11. Right? All right. And that's it. Now you unfortunately you really couldn't hear the horns all that well because there were just no microphones. So these cats are playing their lungs out, and it was sometimes hard to hear. Anyway, at this time he had a huge band. He had 4 or 5 saxophones, 3 trumpets, trombone, 2 guitar players, drummer, 3 drummers. So they're just rehearsing, and James is at the organ, playing organ with the band. They're just running through some instrumentals. My brother had gone up front to the box office because he wanted to see, come back to be able to tell Mr. Brown, we're doing good business tonight. That's. So I'm standing there. I'm dressed in my little suit. I'm clean. I'm this James Brown. You got to show hard. You got to be clean. So I'm sitting there by the side of the stage, and I'm sitting there. Oh my God, this is the James Brown band. And I'm sitting here, and I'm going to be able to hear them just rehearse. So all of a sudden, one of the crew guys, one of the security guys with James's organization sees me standing back there. And he doesn't know who I am. Some skinny little white kid sitting back there. And he says, "Son, this is the backstage area. You're going to have to vacate the premises. You don't belong back here." And I'm thinking, oh shit, you just throw me out in the street. My brother's up front. What are you doing? James Brown hears this. He stops and he says to security, I think the guy's name was Jimmy. He said, "No, Jimmy. He's okay." He said, Rick, that my name was, I always went to the name Rick back when I was a kid rather than Eric. So he said, Rick, come, step closer to the band so you can hear the band. And I'm thinking, oh my God, James Brown just saved my ass from being thrown out. Now, but here's the thing. I'm thinking about, I'm James Brown's best friend now. But as soon as he said that, he looked at the crew cat and said, "He's with the DJ." Now, I got it. Fortunately, I was, I figured, right, I'm with the DJ. Said, the DJ's in the box office. This young man is a DJ's brother. Don't fuck with the DJ. Now, my thing was, now at that point, I'm about ready to look at Jimmy and say, "Yeah, Jimmy, I'm with the DJ." And I didn't, but that. Now, not only was it was, something that I will always relish just because I said, "Oh my God, this is freaking James Brown."
Right.
But it was a lesson. It was like, understand what's going on here.
Right.
So those
that's
so they not crazier than that, other than being in a dressing room with James when after the gigs, James Brown wouldn't just jump into, James Brown has left the building. No, he'd go back to his dressing room and hold court after every gig. And first he'd do the business. He'd check the business for that, do all the accounting. And then there would always be people hanging around, and his dressing room was open house for sometimes 2-3 hours after the end of the gig. And whenever he'd be in town in Pittsburgh or Richmond or wherever, I was hanging, and I would be able to, he always had a little portable record player, back in the late 60s, little portable stereo record player, because he always had test pressings of his next record. or whatever he'd be doing in the recording studio. And he knew me well enough and knew that, how deep I was into the music by then. So I knew the pattern of how the shows would go and when it was okay for me to knock on his door. When I knew I wasn't bothering him, it was right before the gig, whatever. But if he had just come off the first set, then he was chilling for a while. The band as a supporting singers were on. I know, okay, give him 15, 20 minutes. And I can knock on the door and poke my head in and say to the woman who was his wardrobe mistress, I said, her name was Gertrude. I said, Gertrude, Mr. Brown. And said, Rick, come on in. And I said, all right, here we go. I knew I was going to, he was going to want to play me music because he wanted to play the new music. So first of all, he just plays some studio cuts, some B-sides or whatever, just to see what my reaction is, and he said, I like that because he loved playing blues. James Brown, all he really wanted to do was sing blues. That's all he really wanted to do. So and I'd say, that's cool, but I'd be sitting there and he's laughing. He said, all right, Rick, I know, you want to hear a new one. I said, yeah, I want to hear a new one. So then he put it on. I just remember one time he put it on. It was Give It Up or Turn It Loose. And I'm just sitting there and I'm saying, nobody has heard this yet. He just recorded it like 3 days ago.
That's
so
amazing.
This will be on the radio in 2 or 3 weeks. So that was my, you listen to me like I'm, I get excited about this shit. This is why when I met Prince, it was all right.
I get it. And we're, every single one of us are huge, just so you know, every single one of us and everybody here are huge Prince fans. You can obviously see behind me that's
absolutely.
It's just, he was an icon and in my eyes. James was obviously historic, but Prince.
It's a lot of generational. James Brown was my Prince.
So, absolutely. Yeah, I could totally get that. Yeah. Totally get that. Rob, you had a question.
Oh yeah, it was about James Brown. That at that time period, you lived through some amazing musical history, and this is kind of part of that. Mm-hmm. If I'm not mistaken, that was during the later parts of the Chitlin circuit.
Yeah, it was.
What was that like? It's still, I grew up in the 70s, so I kind of have a little bit of understanding, but I can't imagine what that was like. What was it really like?
I'm going to give you a straight up answer, and forgive me because it's a plug. My brother Alan has a book that came out last year. Called "There Was a Time: My Years with James Brown and the Chitlin Circuit." It's go to Barnes and Noble, Amazon, wherever. It's and everything you want to know about the Chitlin Circuit, it's in that book. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was it like for you as a young boy?
It was
it was what everybody expected. So you didn't.
Pretty much. Like I said, Alan, because of his involvement with the radio station, he knew everybody. He knew Otis Redding. He knew Joe Tex. Here's the crazy story. The later that year, and this would have been 1966 also. There was one of the package tour shows that was promoted by Irvin Feld, who was the family who owned the Barnum and Bailey Ringley Brothers Circus. He started out as a promoter doing R&B shows, from the 50s all through the 60s. So Irvin Feld shows, they were called, I believe they were called Super Attraction. There was Supersonic Attractions. Then I think his was, I forget. Anyway, this was an Irvin Feld show. And these shows would go out for maybe 2-3 months. Now this particular show, this would have been sometime in spring or summer of 66, I think it was. The headliner of the show was Joe Tex, because he was big, and he had a big band. The Marvelettes were on that show. Stevie Wonder, little Stevie Wonder was on that show. Walter Jackson was on that show. I forget who else was on. Anyway, I had met Joe Tex the year before, and Joe Tex was a sweetheart of a guy, and he was a really friendly guy. And he would say, and through Alan, and he took a liking to me, whatever he said. And there was at the same theater, the Mosque Theater, or now the Altria. Back in those days, the Stars dressing room, it was just a room with a concrete floor and a little table with a mirror. That was the Stars dressing room. It was just immediately off stage right. And that's what it was. And you know, they put in a rack to hang the clothes on. Anyway, I was watching the show, and Joe Tex is in the Stars dressing room. He says to me, he says, by the way, Rick, he said, anytime you want to just come in and hang in here, feel free, because my door is always open. You know, it wasn't quite like James Brown, but you know, but that's what Joe said. Anyway, I'm taking one act, and I said, okay, I know this act, and I don't think they're working. I think go back and hang with Joe Tex. Why not? So I'm sitting in Joe Tex, and I'm just sitting in a folding chair, and all of a sudden, Solomon Burke was on the show. So Solomon Burke comes in, and he sits down on the floor and starts kicking it with Joe Tex. And I'm just sitting there, just like, said, wow. All of a sudden, Stevie Wonder walked in. Stevie Wonder walks in with his guy, and he says to Joe Tex, he said, Joe, can I borrow a suit? One of my suits got a rip in it, and I'm not going to be able to mend it before I got to go on in 20 minutes. And Joe Tex laughs, and he says, yeah, take the green one. You know, everybody laughs, ha, ha, ha. Right, okay. So, but sure enough, so anyway, so all of a sudden, so they start chatting, and all of a sudden, they're starting talking about musicians. The guys I'd never heard of, you know, just basic like musicians talking about experience with different musicians that they might have had in their bands over the years or whatever. And I'm just sitting there and listening. And the thing was, it really, at the time, it really didn't really faze me because I'd already been hanging with James Brown. So, I mean, you know, but years later, I'm sitting there and said, oh, yeah. Stevie Wonder. Oh, yeah. I sat in a dressing room with him and Joe Tex, Solomon Burke, where they were just sitting kicking it for like 20 minutes before one of them has to run out the door, go do their 10 minutes, you know, because that's about what they got, you know, 10, 12 minutes and then run back or whatever, run into, and so, yeah, that was the Chitlin circuit.
Oh man!
You know, but anyway, Alan's book really does go into gives a really great background in what that whole thing was. Yeah, it was fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's excellent that you mentioned that. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
What's that?
You were saying? Okay.
Jeff, you're
okay.
up.
So no, it's good that you said that. As soon as you mentioned it, I pulled it up real quick and started looking at it, and I posted it for all our listeners who are on so they can take a look at it also. And someone else did also. That way, you know, hey, something's going to happen out of that. We always like to hear that.
Yeah, and Clark said that the book is fantastic, by the way. So
Clark Irwin. Clark lives in Richmond, Virginia. He's a very dear friend of mine. Clark lived in Pittsburgh, and he was the sound engineer in my band Taking Names.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was like, and in those days, you know, by then late 70s, we had a sound system that was, you know, 20 times more than what James Brown's sound system was back in the 60s. Yeah. And Clark was really Clark was the 9th member of the band, because this is a guy that was with us every night. And you know, the old phrase was garbage in, garbage out. So, you know, whatever he could do with the sound, we had to be playing it. But once, you know, he had to make it work in the room, and he did. I've got a lot of live cassette gigs, you know, tapes from that band, and a lot of them sound absolutely fabulous. And that's because of Clark Irwin. He was a good guy. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, actually, that's funny that you said that, because I know that you're not somebody who passes out bootlegs, but some of those shows that you did in the late 70s with Taking Names, that sounds amazing. Do you have any?
I've thought about putting some examples up on YouTube, and I might do that. You know, of some, you know, just as a little thing. You know, because it was my band, and it was my band at a time when the band was together for about, once again, a bar band. We were together for a year and a half, and we played 365 gigs in a year and a half. You know, so I mean, once again, it was like night after night. And if you can play night after night, then that's how a band becomes good. Right. And the band was kind of my workshop, because I was learning the craft. And I had this band to be able, and like I say, we're primarily a cover band, but even you know, having all that wonderful material to screw around with, and then be able to take these absolutely wonderful musicians, still one of the greatest rhythm sections that I ever played with. You know, they were just just phenomenal night after night. The band just, we took names. What can I tell you?
Yeah.
So,
And you kicked it.
for those of you just joining us, we are joined by the legendary Eric Leeds. Jeff, I know you got some, and then we're going to have to dedicate the rest of the time to Prince questions.
Yeah, I'm chewing on this one, man. There's a couple of things about your musical influences and how things are going, and like you've been doing music for such a very long time. Like, we're talking about all these people, and you've been listening and into music and paying attention.
It's been longer than you think.
Right. So, many, many, many years. Let's just put it that way. Now, when you play, we can hear that. We can actually recognize a signature that you have, like just something about what you play when, in your recordings that you just know that, oh, that's Eric Leeds. Oh, wow, versus somebody else. And despite whatever it is we hear in your sound, who do you feel that you grew the most from or influenced by stylistically? Maybe like who you channel when you're in your zone and actually playing.
Well, it's difficult for me when I hear myself not to know where some of the, where the influences are. And I said, oh boy, I gotta disguise that a little better next, like I said, it's funny that through all of the hardcore jazz guys, particularly, I mean, obviously I could spend 6 weeks listening to only Coltrane, and that would be fine. I could spend 6 weeks listening to just Wayne Shorter. We're probably, two of the most significant saxophonists, but then there are dozens and dozens of guys who I've listened to over the years. But your first love, it's almost for the first time you have sex, it good or bad, you're not going to forget it. But if it's good, you'll carry that for the rest of your life. Well, I'm sorry. I just go back to Fathead, David Newman. There is so much about. Now, I never wanted to sound like anybody. I just wanted. When I played baritone saxophone for years before I played tenor, and when I started playing tenor, all I wanted to do was make sure, does it sound like a tenor saxophone? That's all I want. Does it sound like a tenor? Fine. So whatever it was my sound. There are players like Pharoah Sanders, Stan Getz, Joe Farrell, David Liebman,
Archie Shepp.
Archie Shepp absolutely was somebody who I loved back in the day. And I mean, on the primary alto player, because I used to play alto. I don't play alto anymore. Was Cannonball Adderley, who was hands down one of the most significant influences on me as a saxophone player. And too many names that I can't even go into. I can't even remember. Now, obviously, from the standpoint of growing up with James Brown's music and being so heavily involved in funk bands as much as I was in jazz bands, Maceo Parker was, because I used to be able to be around him when I was a kid.
Right.
And I'll tell you something. Now, the thing a lot of people don't realize is that back in the 60s, when Maceo was in James Brown's band in the 60s, he played tenor. He left James Brown's band in 1970. He came back with James around 1973, and then he started playing alto, which is basically all he's played since then. But all of the iconic solos that he played on Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, Cold Sweat, Get It Together, I Got That Feeling, Lick and Stick, Say It Loud, on and on and on. Those are all tenor saxophone solos. One of the greatest coincidences, one of the greatest things that ever happened in music was James Brown and Maceo Parker finding each other.
Right.
Because Maceo already played like he did before he met James Brown. And it was like, when you listen to Maceo, as great as he is, it's like, okay, this is how this cat plays. If only there was a music that really was perfect for how he plays. And James Brown was making that music, but yet he didn't have Maceo yet. Now he had great saxophone players. There was a cat who was with him for years and years by the name of St. Clair Pinckney, who was from Augusta, Georgia. Tremendous R&B saxophone player. But Maceo was like the man from Mars. You know, he came with something else. And when you first heard James Brown's music and Maceo, you just said, "Oh my God, this is," you know, it was one. And Maceo got the gig because of his brother, who was a drummer, Melvin Parker, who James hired in 1964. And Melvin told James, "Well, Mr. Brown, I'd like to go on the road with you. Do you have a gig for my brother?" And James said, "What does your brother play?" He said, "Well, plays tenor." And so I don't need another tenor player, but I tell you what, I could use a baritone player. So he met Maceo, and Maceo's told me this many times. Funny story. He said, James looked at Maceo and said, "Son, can you play baritone? Do you play baritone?" Now Maceo had never played baritone before. He said, "Damn right, I play baritone." So for the first year Maceo was with James, he was primarily a baritone player, you know. But he was also, and anyway, it was one of the greatest, most serendipitous moments in music that those two found each other. Maceo Parker could do things with the saxophone that I have never heard anybody else do.
Wow.
Nobody.
Yeah.
The only cat that you could even confuse with that was, say, King Curtis, you know, somebody like that. Okay. But Maceo's articulation and his ability to take one beat of one note and slice it into about 5,000 different parts. Now, I can play note for note almost every solo he played on the James Brown records back then. But there are certain phrases that you cannot replicate. I can come close, but It was like, people used to talk about like John Lee Hooker, how he would sing. Everything would be in between the beat. You could not, his time was impeccable, but yet you can't count it. You can't notate it. You can't count it. Well, that's Maceo as a saxophone. And the closest thing to Maceo as a saxophone player is James Brown as a singer.
Right.
There you go. You know,
that makes sense.
And yeah. So, yeah.
And to talk about legendary horn players, because I want to switch to, I know our audience will kill us if we don't get to some Prince questions, because I want to kind of tie this to Miles Davis. Because, you know, obviously there's a couple parts to this, but I want to kind of combine it into one question here. Miles Davis, I mean, one of the most amazing trumpet players, and I mean, I can't really think of anybody that kind of has done it better as far as just kind of going off. But I kind of remember we just had the Sign of the Times deluxe edition that had come out, which featured Miles Davis, that came out for the performance of New Year's Eve at Paisley Park. And I remember hearing the story about all of you guys were just like stunned because out walks Miles Davis, and Prince is obviously a huge fan, and they kind of walk out and. We knew Miles was there. I already had, spoken with Miles. Yeah, when they actually see him walking out on the stage, you're like, oh yeah, it's just like shocking. Yeah, and I want to make sure that I'm not missing something, because as I was watching it, I was just, you think, oh, Miles Davis, here we go, and it just didn't see the performance itself. Just seemed like a bunch of. I'm not a horn player, but it just seemed uninspired and just kind of just trudged along. Yeah. Were you as a horn, was just like, man, yeah. And I was thinking to myself, am I missing something, or are the other horn player, is Eric looking at him and going, what exactly is this? And the second part of this question revolves around the song, Can I Play With You? Which was sent off to Miles, and he put his horn part on and sent it back. And I remember hearing you and Prince sitting down and looking at this and listening to it and going, okay, this is probably not where I expected to get back from him. So just kind of give me an idea. Obviously we're running short on time. I don't want to. Okay. First of all, of all the musicians that are important to me, and I could spend an hour just talking about my love for Afro-Cuban music and salsa and Eddie Palmieri and cats like that, because that's where I live as much as anything else. Right. But as far as my aspirations
for anything that I would have, tried to be as a musician when left my own devices. Nobody is more significant for me than Miles.
Wow.
Yeah. No one come. As far as being able to say, okay, this. I was into Miles's music, but growing up at the time, his album "Bitches Brew" is probably still the singular most significant piece of music, because that was the more than anything else, and all the hardcore traditional jazz that I love as much. But coming up at that time, in 1970, when I was like in senior in high school and getting ready to go on the next year to music school, it was like that was okay. Now I know what I want.
Right.
Right. More, and there's other music that I love as much as that album, but that was the album that basically said, "Oh my God, it's all here." Now, by the time I met Miles and got to know him in the 80s, Miles couldn't play no more. I mean, to be absolutely honest, he was still the musician he was, and on any given night, you could still feel the heart with his own gigs, but he couldn't play the trumpet too well anymore. And that's something I had already, kind of come to terms with, that his ability as a trumpet player, just, first of all, he had taken 4 or 5 years off in the late 70s. You can't do that, playing it and then come back and think,
Right, you lose a step. For sure.
Now, on any given day, he still had great bands. He was still playing music that resonated with a lot of people. But I was looking at Miles and said, this is the cat who meant so much to me, but I was able to divorce that from what he was now. So it's not like I'm sitting there being disappointed. Oh, Miles, so no, hell no. This is still Miles Davis. But it was still kind of difficult for me to even relate to him as the musician and what he was, that I related and still do for what the music meant to me when I was growing up. More specifically, that particular gig of Prince's band, I know it's iconic for many, many people because of this nature of the gig. It's a live gig by Prince. It's always going to have its moments. I didn't think that was a particularly good gig.
No.
I mean, from beginning to end.
Right.
I thought it was missing something.
What it was missing is the fact that we had been off. We had you see, the show was basically, with some changes, basically what the Sign of the Times concert show had been. It was a little bit different in some places. It was kind of a transition period, but we had not gigged in several months. So it was New Year's Eve. We had been on vacation. Everyone had scattered for the holidays, and we knew we were coming back to do that gig. So basically for us, it was a pickup gig, and there was no real audience. It was a special invitation-only affair at Paisley Park. We played on the soundstage, and most of the people that were there were corporate people.
Right.
Yeah. Now, what Prince did is he invited some younger kids to be there to just try to give it some kind of an ambience, but there really wasn't, it wasn't something that we were really going to get that excited about as far as like getting any feedback from the audience. The main purpose of the concert was to raise money for a charitable organization that was giving out clothes and food to homeless people in Minneapolis, because it was a brutally cold winter. And that was really the primary reason that the whole affair was put together as a New Year's celebration. My mother and father came up from Florida to that. And it was also kind of introducing to the corporate people in the Twin Cities, Paisley Park as a business entity. So, but the main purpose was to raise money for homeless people, for, clothes and food for homeless people. Other than that, we were just there. I think, I assume we did a long rehearsal, maybe the day before. We probably got in, a day or two before to basically just remember, oh, okay, this is what we were doing 4 or 5 months ago. It was a pickup gig. That's really all it was.
And so what was the story with the Can I Play With You? Like, what were your, you must have some type of expectations with that.
Well, okay. Prince, when Miles was going to leave Columbia Records and sign with Warner Brothers, which was a big deal, you know, in the music business. Been with Columbia Records for 30 years or whatever. Now he's going to Warner Brothers. So everybody at Warner Brothers, knowing that Miles loved Prince and that Prince loved Miles, they thought it'd be a beautiful thing for Prince to have a song of his given to Miles for Miles's first Warner Brothers album, the album that was Tutu. Anyway, so December 85, Alan called and said, Prince needs you out in California. And I said, oh shit, you know, here goes my Christmas. Well, it was the day after Christmas. So whatever, I flew out there. Prince had the song and he said, I wrote a song for Miles. And he said, I need you to put a horn arrangement on it. So I said, so I'm thinking, yeah, you know, you know, I mean, and so anyway, I put the horn arrangement on it. Prince left the studio. I spent the evening putting a horn arrangement on it. Prince came back, double checked it. I said, you know, everything cool? He said, yeah, I really dig it. Fine. He said, Miles was living in Malibu at the time, I think. So Prince said to me, he said, I think tomorrow I'm going to take the cassette over to Miles's house. They had, I don't know if I think they had met briefly once for all of 5 minutes. And of course, I corrected Prince. I said, no, Prince, we are taking the tape to Miles's house.
Right.
Hello.
Now it never happened. Prince told me the next day. He said, "No, I'm just gonna send it to him." I said, "Okay." I didn't think the song was all that much, just personally, you know. But now, on the other hand, it's not for me to say that. On the other hand, I'm just saying I'm going to get into Miles Davis' discography because of this, right. You know, because I'm on this song.
Right.
You know? So my own personal feelings about the song, the hell with that. Send it to Miles. Get Miles, you know. It's my understanding that some of the keyboard players that were in Miles's band put some more keyboards on the song also. We got the song back from Miles several months later. I don't think it was maybe till March or April, you know, several months later. And only then did I kind of sit down and just listen to the whole thing. And I said, okay, now I can listen to it with some sort of detachment. It was a bunch of horseshit. I mean, to really be honest. By then, my own feeling about the song was such that the song ain't great. There really wasn't much for Miles to do with it, you know, other than just play a few phrases in between some holes. And you know, this is Miles Davis. By then, whatever was going to inspire Miles Davis to do something either at his best or, heaven forbid, something that Miles he'd never heard from, this wasn't it.
Right.
You know? So I didn't say, you know, I didn't say anything because on the other hand, I'm like thinking, you know, I'd love nothing better than to scream from the rooftops, I'm going to be on the next Miles Davis album. You know, even if it's just playing horn parts, you know, on a song. So I had a vested interest in wanting this to go forward. But, you know, I realized that, you know, just from hearing Prince mention a few, I think Prince had asked me what I thought about it. And when his mind is made up, he doesn't ask anybody's opinion. I mean, not in a manner that he's really interested from wanting to know. So I realized at that point that he had second thoughts, because if he was good with it, he wasn't going to necessarily come to me. So what do you think about this? Should, you know, and I told him, I said, Prince, look, once again, I'd love nothing better than, you know, to be on this album with his and have my name in the credit, so assuming that they might actually do that. But I said, this ain't nothing here. And Prince basically, and I don't even remember what Prince said, but the fact that you never heard about it again was his answer.
Right.
Now, I think Prince had already heard some of the other music that they had been doing. And that was that album was produced primarily by Marcus Miller. And the song would have been a real outlier. It would not have fit with what the rest of the album was going to be anyway. So from that standpoint, it didn't make sense for the song to be on it. So that was that, you know. Now, I did finally get into Miles Davis' discography several years later when Prince did a song for Chaka Khan called Sticky Wicked. That was on her album. And me and Matt Liston, we did the horn section work on that. And then they sent that to Miles, and Miles plays around in it. So finally, officially, you look at the credits on that Chaka Khan album, tenor saxophone, trumpet by Eric Leeds and Alana Bliss, trumpet solo by Miles. Said, yes, I'm there. Now, of course, I was never in the studio working with Miles. Prince was never in the studio with Miles. The only time Miles Davis and Prince were ever in the same room for the purpose of making music together in real time was on that gig. On that gig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we only have 15 more minutes left with Eric. And so I'll ask one more question. Jeff, you can ask one more question. Rob, you can ask one more question. So go over your questions that you have and pick out which one that you got to ask so that he can get to his game. Rob or Jeff, or whichever one of you is got your question ready.
Yeah, I actually do, because it's kind of off of what you were just saying. Mm-hmm. And so my thing is there a song that you can think of for all intents and purposes that you've done with Prince, or, in your time, that you just knew, like you knew this was the one, like something about it was like, oh, this is awesome. And what you played, you knew was the hit, like, oh, this is magic, but it still never actually made the cut. Is there any song that, like, for some reason you're like, what happened?
Well, I can tell you probably one of my absolute favorite Prince songs, and I believe it is it on the Sign of the Times box set. It was a song called In a Room with No Light.
Yes.
Is that on the box set? It is. Okay.
It is super deluxe.
Now the thing is, that's Wendy and Lisa's song.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the few times that it was actually a live performance in the studio. Sheila was on drums, Wendy and Lisa, myself, Matt Liston on trumpet. We actually had a third horn on that. There's a wonderful saxophone player by the name of Norbert Stachel, who lives in New York, was an alto player, and he was a member of Sheila E.'s band at the time. So he was on that recording with us. I play a little solo at the end of it as it fades out. The solo is just whatever it was, but the background vocals and everything that Wendy and Lisa and Sheila and Susanna Melvoin did were absolutely just wonderful. But Sheila on drums on that is just ridiculous. I mean, it's just tremendous. I freaking love that song. Now, it wasn't something that I went away with thinking, oh, this is going to be a big hit, because I don't have a good track record for predicting hits. To me, Kiss was a throwaway.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It was the biggest hit. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do I know? But that was one. I always really dug Power Fantastic. Once again, that was a Wendy and Lisa song. So
great tune, man.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, they're wow. So there was another song of his that this is funny. This is funny when Prince could get very excited about something, but you had to realize that his excitement about something was excitable only for that moment. Because and what Prince might say or feel about something at the moment was heartfelt, but it had shit to do with what he was going to think or say about it a week later. Right. So that was part of his process. One of the first songs of his that I did anything on was a song called Sexual Suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And has it ever come out?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Okay. Black Album. Was that? No, it's an outtake on Crystal Ball. I'm sorry.
Okay. And I have no. Yeah, I don't even know if I have. I might have that somewhere. Okay, I've got rough mixes that I did of the song with the horns way loud. I had gone and it was a song that he wasn't in the studio with me. He just left instructions. He just said, I need you to go in and do something with this. So I went in on an evening and did whatever I did. The next day he came back to me and he said, I love what you did on the end of it. Can you do more of that kind of stuff on the beginning and through the, I said, sure, what, fine with me. I'm going, I'm getting another, I'm getting another paycheck. So fine, I'll do, night after night. Is it right yet? I can go in tomorrow night and do better because a paycheck every night, So, so anyway, I went in the next night and it was just me and his engineer at the time, Susan Rogers, and she came up with some really cool effects on some of the horns. So whatever it was that I came up with, the next day Prince came to me and he was like, you would have thought that he just invented the bicycle. I mean, that was the greatest thing in the world. Now, from my standpoint, well, this is good. It's good when the boss really likes what you do. But from a standpoint, well, this is Prince. And just from a musical standpoint, him giving me props, I don't take that lightly, So, but, it was like, well, the song didn't come out until 10 years later. So whatever his excitement about, so you had to realize that's just part of the process.
Right.
So,
yeah. Yeah, that's very, very typical. So my question is about The Flesh. Obviously that was a project that had so many amazing songs. Lucky enough that I'm connected with a bunch of different collectors of Prince's music and unreleased, and I've got pretty much everything from The Flesh.
Yeah, it's all out there. It's all
High Colonic and all those stuffs. Yeah. And you were actually you were heavily involved in that whole entire process with junk music and just everything that was on there, and you did a lot of the production work on it and everything, and you just put in so many hours and just kind of crafting this. And I guess my question is, first off, it preceded Madhouse. I saw some questions about whether or not Madhouse was going to do another album, and as far as I know, there's like 3 albums by Madhouse, one of which is unreleased.
Well, my first solo album, Times Squared, was going to be a 3rd Madhouse album originally. It was going to be the second attempt at a 3rd Madhouse album.
Right.
Basically what it was. But anyway,
you had just a massive library of officially unreleased jams, technically. But yeah, Times Squared. If anybody wants another Madhouse album, all you need to do is simply get Times Squared, because that's pretty much it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was kind of picking up, I mean, if anyone really wants it, this is what I do now with Paul Peterson. We got our thing, LP Music. This album is not out yet, but it will be.
You saw it here first, everybody.
Yeah.
This is this an LP project or what is it?
Yeah, it was LP Music. It was the thing we did a few years ago. We crowdfunded it. So the only people that have it are the people that contributed, to us being able to make it.
Is the title? What's have a title? What's the title of that?
Yeah, it's called No Words.
Okay.
No Words.
Yeah. All right.
So it's not currently available. We're still looking. We still are waiting to hear from a couple of labels that have expressed a little bit of interest. I'm not holding my breath as much as I'd like to. So we'll throw it out there independently eventually. So, Questlove plays on a track. Mike Stern is on guitar and a couple things. Nice. Yeah. And anyway,
but the question about The Flesh was is that you were pretty much responsible for editing and putting together this album, The Flesh, and did a lot of work. And of course, it got shelved.
Well, it was never going to be released.
Oh, I thought it was. Okay. No. Well, because that was my question about, the editing and the unenviable task of having to choose between all those songs, and ultimately how you felt about that process.
Everything on there, those sessions were just extemporaneous jam sessions over a period of few nights. In fact, it was the same week, the week or two after I had gone out to the Can I Play With You for Miles. I was out there, I was supposed to be out there for 2 days. I ended up being stuck out there for like 2-3 weeks. And we were going to the studio a lot. And on any given night, Sheila might be with us, Levi Caesar, Wendy and Lisa were with us on 1 or 2 of the nights or whatever. So that's what all of this stuff came from. Prince basically, Prince would get excited about, like I say, but he never once ever really indicated that this is something he was serious about. And I never took it to be that. What he was doing for me, which I was so grateful and thankful for, is he was basically saying, I got the studio locked out, Sunset Sound out in LA. Right. I feel like going out. I ain't coming to the studio tonight. I got a date. The studio's yours. Take this music and have fun.
I love that.
Do whatever the hell you want with it. Chop it up. If you want to do some overdubs, take that 40, the junk music thing was like 40, 45 minutes. You said, try to come up with something that maybe actually musically might make sense, just to see. And that's basically what all I had in mind. And I'm just sitting there. I said, this is great. This is what I love to do. I got a world-class recording studio. I got all of this. I got great engineers that I can learn things. I was working with an engineer. His name was Coke Johnson, who was working with Prince out at Sunset at that time. So basically, it was he and I in the studio for several nights, just screwing around with this stuff. And the junk music, some of it, but the junk music and that stuff wasn't even on multi-track. We recorded it direct to 2-track. So that you couldn't remix anything on it. It was what it was. So I was just thinking, okay, how would I try to edit this extemporaneous? I mean, we're just 40 minutes of us just jerking off. It's really all it was. And with something like that, you might find 4 or 5 minutes that are really cool, and then 10 minutes of us just searching for the next musical point. So it gave me the opportunity for and with this guy Coke Johnson, who was like a real old school cut and paste engineer, who knew how to take a razor blade to the tape and all of that. And it was the first opportunity that I really had to be able to really kind of experiment with editing and things like that. And I learned a lot, because there's certain things that I would say, okay, here's an obvious edit point where, I want to use this like 3 or 4 minutes, and I got 10 minutes of just bullshit. Let's get rid of that. And then we'll cut back in. Here's the point where I'll cut back in. And we, take out the middle and then butt it together. The only thing was, over a 10-minute time, even though Prince was playing drums on the end, his time was very good. The time was just shifting enough that now you realize there's a tempo difference here, and that ain't gonna work. So now back to square one. So you learn all these tricks, and there were some things that I would say, well, here are 2 points that I think would musically make a good edit. And Coke Johnson would say, I can't edit there because, and I'd say, why not? He said, listen to it. Listen to the cymbal. Listen to the ride cymbal. And I said, okay. He said, this is, and he would show me, he would cut, he would make the edit and cut, and said, and then I'd hear it. The cymbal would choke because he had to find a place where the cymbal could bleed over.
Yeah, because it kept ringing out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there were other points where I would listen and I would say, well, this would be good at a point. I don't think this would work. And Coke would tell me, no, that I can make work. And I'd sit there and I said, how are you going to do that? And he said, I'll show you. Take a razor blade, put it together with Scotch tape, seamless. So this is what I got out of that. Wow. And I said, this is great. This is like going to school, So I never had any disappointment of the fact that it was never going to be released. I knew it wasn't going to be released. Now, I happen to feel that from my own personal standpoint, there are some minutes of that music that I like a hell of a lot better than anything we did under the name Madhouse.
Yeah. There's some great songs at Madhouse, but yeah, I love a lot of the stuff that's on the Flesh. Rob, are you back? You got audio now? Nope, he doesn't have audio.
Nope,
no.
Still
okay. But I knew what his question was. He told me what his question was. He wanted to know what it was like the first time that you actually met Prince, the first 10-minute period of window where you first met Prince, what it was like, what kind of vibe you got from him, that type of, and I don't want to kind of mess up his question, but it said, please describe your first meeting with Prince, the first, songwriting experience, and,
well, the first meeting was working on the music for what was going to be the family album. And because, my involvement as a member of his band didn't come until years later. And there was absolutely nothing about, wasn't a thought that I had. And I don't think it's a thought he had. He was putting together this project, the family, and he decided he wanted a saxophone player on it. Like I said, my brother Alan had played him some. Prince was sufficiently enthused to want to fly me up to a recording session. I had no illusions or expectations about it because it was kind of funny for my brother to say, well, he's putting a new group together. He wants you in the group. I said, what is he? He hasn't even met me yet. He wants me in a band that he's putting together. It at that point in time, if you're a producer making like an R&B, you know, in the mid 80s, making an R&B funk album, and you want a saxophone player, most producers can call David Sanborn, you know, at that point in time. Or Michael Brecker or Prince could call Maceo, you know. Fortunately, Prince was not somebody, you know, Prince wasn't really that interested in having a known sound. You know, he wanted, you know, he liked people that were kind of what he kind of considered homegrown or whatever. So fortunately, whatever it was that he heard that he was sufficiently enthusiastic about, that I came up. Now, like I said, at that point, I had very, very little familiarity with his music. The only album of his that I had even ever listened to was 1999. I didn't much care for it. I liked the song 1999. The rest of the album just didn't appeal to me. Purple Rain was just coming out. I don't even know if the album was out yet when Doves Cry was out. And I kind of dug that. I found it more interesting than something that I was going to really love. But it was an interesting piece. So that was pretty much my sum total of knowledge of Prince. So I'm going in to do a recording session for this guy, and I'm going to get paid for it. And at the end of the session, I'm going to go home to Atlanta, and we'll see what happens next. Alan introduced me to him. And I think I flew up here. It was a Sunday evening. The session was the next afternoon. Came into the studio, which was in a warehouse. You know, this is years before Paisley Park had been built. So he was, you know, it was just like a rehearsal hall. And he had a studio set up in it. But I mean, there was no isolation or anything. It was just this big room. He had 4 songs ready to go. All 4 songs that ended up on the Family album. And the first thing he said to me was, I could give you a cassette to live with for a couple days if you want to familiarize yourself with the music. And I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to have any obligation or accountability beyond just whatever it was that I was going to be able to do in this recording session. I wanted the session to start. I wanted it to end, to be done with it, and go home. And whatever was going to happen, you know. But if he's given us, oh, now what? I'm supposed to come in here and feel like I'm, you know, that I'm into this, because I didn't want to even be into it at that point. I just wanted to do the session. So I looked at him, and I you know, I wasn't trying to be cocky or anything. I just said, well, if that's what you would want, fine. But I said, you know, I got my horn. I'm ready to go if you just want to hit it. And he kind of, you know, I kind of remembered him as just maybe, you know, giving me one of his little smiles like, oh, okay, you know, let's see what the, you know, whether it were really that, I don't know, you would have asked him. All I know is that's what we did. And 2.5 hours later, session was over. He had 4 songs, and it was, thank you very much. This is where you send the check. And, you know, that was now I enjoyed it. I truly enjoyed. First of all, I enjoyed the music, which was important. And I enjoyed working with him. It was an enjoyable afternoon. And, you know, I'm hardly going to say that I went out of there thinking, oh my God, this is the greatest musician I could ever, you know. Clearly he knew what he wanted. He knew how to get out of me things that were appropriate for the songs, you know, beside just what I would have done left to my own devices. So, so there was that. So there was an, you know, an understanding that, okay, this is a serious guy. That whatever the music is, whether I like the music or not, this guy is serious. But, you know, it would be an insult to say that I came out of there thinking, oh my God, because a musician of Prince's caliber, everything that you can learn about him, you're not going to get from just 1 2-hour session. You know, right. All it was 4 pieces of music, and coincidentally, 2 of the pieces of music were just straight ahead, kind of just typical R&B funk jams, which shit I had been doing professionally and personally for 15-20 years already. So there was nothing more, but, you know, those songs just fell just in my wheelhouse. So, you know, that's basically what, like, okay, cool. You know,
yeah.
You know, my involvement and my, you know, real appreciation of him was incremental. It's something that you learn over a period of time. what was so fascinating, so wonderful was to be a part of his musical process. He didn't ask me to come into the studio. He told me, because it was my job. Particularly once I was a member of his band, it's like, I'd get a call from him, or I'd get a call from my brother, or one of the people in the office that said, Prince needs you to come in the studio at 8:00 this evening. And it was like, well, I don't feel like it tonight. No, it's my job. So we're there at 8:00. Now, on any given night, depending on what the music was, and depending on what the mood of Prince was, a lot of times me and Matt Bliston, sometimes he might play us the track first, but a lot of times he wouldn't. There were nights on a certain song that he knew exactly what he wanted us to do. And he would get us in the studio, get our horns ready, warm up, they could do a sound check, get the sound, the engineer, and he would maybe just fast forward the song and maybe a minute and a half in the song. He said, okay, here's the line I need you to play. And he'd hum the line to us, like, whatever, So I said, okay, and here's where to put it. We're 8 bars before where I need you to put it. So I'll start the tape there. I'll give you a count. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're in. So we're hearing it. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's it. And they said, cool. Now let me fast forward the tape. Well, I need you to do that again. And I said, now I'm going to back up the tape to the bridge. Eric, I need a horn line for the bridge. I don't have one. Give me something. I said, I haven't even heard it yet. Play me to, I said, oh, okay. You'll play me to like 8 bars. And I said, and now if you're working with Prince in that, whatever, you have to do it fast. You don't have time to think about it in that circumstance. You basically just, I'm sorry to be crude. I'm pulling down my pants. I'm bending over and I'm farting, and whatever comes out, that's what's going on tape.
That's right.
Really. So, right. And if he doesn't dig it, then he'll say, no, that ain't it. So I'll bend over again. All right. I had beans for dinner. I got plenty, or he might say, I like it except for the 3rd note. Can you change it a little bit? I said, fine, whatever you want. Or I might say, Prince, if we're going to change that, voice leading would be better if we now did this. That's how that might happen,
Yeah.
And basically then he might fast forward and say, okay, I got to vamp out for the last 30 seconds. I need you to put a solo. Just start playing. We're in the key of E, whatever key we're in. There ain't no changes. Just I'll give you 4, hit it, and just play it out. And that's it. And then only then we come in the booth and he might then play the song for us from beginning to end. So we even see what the hell we're really doing. Now, another night, he might play us the song first and just say, I don't have any, I know what I want, but I'm not sure how to get there yet. On another song, I might get instructions and say, he needs you to do an arrangement on the song, but he's not going to be there. So go in the studio and do whatever you want. Over a period of time, and there are always exceptions to this, but I kind of learned that over a period of time, if he wasn't at the session, more often than not, the song didn't mean as much to him as a song that he was going to be at the session and hands-on with us. Now, I'm sure there were exceptions to that, and then there were other times, where he would have something done and then give it to me after the fact and say, for all intents and purposes, this is done, but just out of curiosity, take it and screw around with it and see what you come, which is what he did with Ballad of Dorothy Parker.
Right.
That song was done. Now that's one of my absolute favorite songs of his.
Mine too.
That song was done, and we already had it. So I mean, I had already heard it, and I was really very surprised when he asked me, to do something with that. Now he wasn't there. There were a couple other songs he needed me to do something. So me and Bliston, we went in. I wrote an arrangement for it, and I was not surprised at all that he didn't use what we did. And curiously, for whatever reason, I didn't take home a rough mix of that. Oftentimes I would get rough mixes of whatever we would do sometimes in the studio, but I didn't have one for that. So over the years, I didn't have a copy of that. So I had no recollection of what it was that we had actually done. And then once, many years after the fact, I was cleaning out an old file cabinet of music, and I came across some sheet music, and it didn't have a title on it. And I'm looking at this, what in the world is my handwriting? And I said, what in the world is this? So I sat down at the piano and started playing. I said, oh, wow, this is the horn arrangement I did for Dorothy Parker. So because I had written it out. And I'm sitting there playing the lines, and I said, oh, it was nice, whatever, So when it came out in the box set last year, it was the first time I had heard it since we did it. And I like what I did. I like the horn lines that, but
I didn't like it the first time that I heard it.
Well, it doesn't really have much.
The fact that it grew because the original had grown on me so much.
Yeah.
But now that I've heard it more often, because we have an online radio station called Funked Up, and it plays 24/7. And that stuff is in there. And now that I've heard it a lot of times, I do actually really like it.
Yeah. But you see, this is really what it was. My arrangement on it was a solution in search of a problem.
That's that good way to put it, I guess.
I like that. Because here was what my process was. I didn't give a damn about the song. To the extent like I really dug the song, but it was like, this song now belongs to me. This is my approach. It's now he's given the song. And if you kind of listen to it, it's almost like horn arrangement with vocal accompaniment. Right. Is really what it was. Yeah. Now, so I understood when he didn't use it, there was no reason for him to, because it really didn't, there was no added value to what the story of the song was. So even with me and my ego, or whatever, I could say, yeah, man, if he had released it with the horns, that would have been the bomb. No, I never ever listened to that song and thought, oh, wow, he should, that song was a perfect little gem, the way it was. And the horns were just me having, and it was like, hey, that's cool. He's asking me to take a piece of music that I like, and I'm going to go in the studio and just fuck around with it. And whatever I come up with is like, he's either going to use it or not. And what do I care? I'm getting paid. Right. I'm getting a paycheck one way or the other. So somebody else. Well, here, I don't remember ever playing that song with him live. We did rehearse it a couple times in the rehearsals for what became the Sign of the Times show, but it never made the show. But I do recall that in a couple of the rehearsals, we didn't use any of the horn lines that I'd written, but we did add a pad, like a horn line, just like whole notes underneath the chords, just 2-part harmony to reinforce the basic chords that we're playing on keyboards. And if I had gone in and just done that, it might have actually added something that he might have used, and that might have actually added some, because it was something that would just added a little texture without drawing attention to itself, which is really what the arrangement should have been. But that wasn't what my intent was. So that wasn't what he was going to get. So, so I laughed and just said, oh, this is funny. They're actually finally going to release that. Well, let me hear what it is. And said, oh, well, that's some great lines. Well, guess what? Sooner or later, you might hear that arrangement in a song of mine somewhere down the line. Right. So
might as well.
Yeah.
Last week we had Greg Boyer on the show, and he told us that you made him late to rehearsal one time because you were trying to smuggle in liquid chicken into an arena. Is that a story?
No, don't remember That's a Greg Boyer story. That's a Greg Boyer story, which means it's completely made up.
No, actually, I kind of twisted that one. He said that I wanted him to come up with a story that was tied to you.
It's a good one.
And he said, I was late for practice one time, and I came into the room, and Eric and all you guys were sitting there, and he said, "I'm sorry, it's late. Somebody was held up at the gate because they were trying to smuggle in liquid chicken," and everybody laughed, and Prince was like, "You're crazy, man."
Right. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got to let this man get to his
my game. Right.
Eric Leeds, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christopher, Jeff, Rhythm. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been an honor, sir. Thank you so much. Get to your game. Get out of here.
All right, man. Peace.
Thank you so much.
Okay, man. Bye-bye.